$39 trillion. That is the national debt of the United States of America right now in March of 2026. And I need you to understand what that number actually means, because most people hear it and their eyes glaze over. So let me put it in terms that will keep you up tonight. The government is adding a new $1 trillion to that number roughly every 5 months. Not every year. Every 5 months. The Congressional Budget Office just projected a $1.9 trillion deficit for this fiscal year alone, and that number was calculated before the war, before the oil shock, before the latest round of job losses. Interest payments on that debt are about to cross $1 trillion this year. That means the United States government will spend more money just paying interest on money it already borrowed than it spends on national defense, more than it spends on veterans, more than it spends on education, transportation, and science combined. And here is the part that should genuinely disturb you. That interest bill works out to roughly $7,700 per American household. You are not getting a service for that money. You are not getting a road, a school, a hospital. You are paying the cover charge on decades of decisions made by people who will never feel the consequences. And while Washington writes those checks, 59% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency without going into debt. 27% have zero emergency savings. The highest that number has ever been recorded. The economy lost 92,000 jobs in February. Consumer spending just declined for the first time since May. Retail sales fell. Gas prices jumped $1 in a single month. And every single major Wall Street bank, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Moody's, every one of them has raised their recession probability in the last 2 weeks. Mark Zandi at Moody's just put it at 49%. That is a coin flip. You are living inside a coin flip right now, and most people do not even know the coin has been tossed. So no, you are not ready for what is coming. And this video is going to show you exactly why the job market is lying to you. Here is something almost nobody is paying attention to. And I mean nobody. Not the news anchors, not the politicians, not even most of the economists on cable television. The American job market, the thing that every administration points to as proof that things are fine, is breaking down right in front of us. And the numbers are not even trying to hide it anymore. In February 2026, the U.S. economy did not add jobs, it lost them. 92,000 jobs disappeared in a single month. And that was not some freak one-off event. Job growth has now turned negative in 5 of the last 9 months. 5 out of 9. And here is where it gets really uncomfortable. When they went back and revised the previous months, the numbers were even worse than originally reported. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has been quietly revising job figures downward for over a year now, meaning the job market was weaker than you were told, for longer than you were told. That rosy picture Washington was painting in 2025 about record employment and economic momentum, it was wrong. The revisions prove it was wrong. And they knew it was slowing down. Unemployment has now climbed to 4.4%. That might not sound dramatic if you are just glancing at a headline, but context matters. That is up from 3.4% less than 2 years ago. A full percentage point. In labor economics, a 1-point rise in unemployment in that time frame has historically preceded or coincided with a recession in every single cycle going back to the 1950s. Every single one. And the SOM rule, which is the Federal Reserve's own recession indicator created by former Fed economist Claudia Sahm, has been flashing warning signals. The rule triggers when the 3-month average of unemployment rises 0.5 point above its lowest point in the prior 12 months. That is happening right now, and if you zoom out even further, the picture gets worse. 2025 was the weakest year for job growth outside of an actual recession since 2002, not 2008, not 2020, 2002. And that was before the war started, before oil spiked past $100 a barrel, before gas jumped $1 a gallon in a single month. The Federal Reserve's own small business credit survey just came out last week, and it found that the share of small businesses expecting revenue growth dropped to its lowest level since 2020. Employment expectations sank to multi-year lows. Lending standards tightened again. These are not theoretical risks. This is happening in real time. And the people running this economy are telling you everything is fine, while every data point they publish says the opposite. The job market is not strong, it is deteriorating. And the gap between what they are telling you and what the data actually shows is the most dangerous gap in the American economy right now. Let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself for a second. When was the last time you checked your bank account at the end of the month and felt comfortable? Not rich, not luxurious, just comfortable. Like you had a cushion. Like if something went wrong, a car repair, a medical bill, a layoff notice, you could absorb it without your stomach dropping. Because the data says most of you cannot. And I am not saying that to be dramatic. Bankrate just released their 2026 Emergency Savings Report, and the numbers are staggering. 59% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency expense from savings. Not $10,000, not $5,000, $1,000. A single car repair, a single ER visit, and 59% of the country would have to put it on a credit card, borrow from a friend, take out a loan, or simply not pay it. 27% of American adults have zero emergency savings. None. Nothing. That is the highest number ever recorded in the history of that survey. And it gets worse. Credit card debt in America has now crossed $1.3 trillion. That is trillion with a T. The average household with credit card debt owes over $6,500, and they are carrying that at an average interest rate of nearly 23%. 23%. That means if you owe $6,000 on a credit card and you are making minimum payments, you will be paying that off for the next 20 years. And you will have paid more in interest than you ever owed in the first place. Meanwhile, 47% of all credit card holders are carrying a balance, nearly half the country, and 61% of people with credit card debt have been in debt for at least a year. That is up from 53% just 2 years ago. It is getting worse, not better. And here is the thing nobody is saying out loud. 41% of people in credit card debt say the primary cause was an emergency expense, medical bills, car repairs, home repairs. Another 33% say it was day-to-day expenses, groceries, utilities, childcare. That is up from 26% just 3 years ago. People are not drowning in credit card debt because they bought flat-screen TVs and designer shoes. They are drowning because they bought eggs and paid their electric bill. And the spending data confirms it. Retail sales fell 0.2% in January. Consumer spending is now declining. CNN just ran a headline that said the two main pillars propping up the economy, jobs and consumer spending, are both cracking at the same time. Wells Fargo's own economist warned that rising gas prices are going to eat into whatever spending power people have left. And Moody's projects real consumer spending growth to slow to just 1.5%. The American consumer is not resilient. The American consumer is exhausted. They are tapped out. They are held together by credit cards and anxiety. And the next shock, whether it is a layoff, a medical bill, or gas hitting $5 a gallon, is going to push millions of people over an edge they have been standing on for years. The housing market has locked out an entire generation. I want you to think about something for a second. Your parents probably bought their first house in their mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s if they waited. They saved up a down payment that was a stretch but doable. They got a mortgage with a rate that made sense. They built equity. That equity became the foundation of everything else. Retirement, stability, generational wealth, all of it. That path does not exist anymore. Not for most people. And I am not being dramatic. A Bankrate analysis from this year found that more than 75% of homes currently on the market are unaffordable to the typical American household. 75%. And they calculated that most Americans are about $30,000 short of what it takes to afford a median-priced home. The median home price in the United States right now is over $400,000. To buy that home at a 6.2% mortgage rate, which is where rates are sitting as of this week according to Freddie Mac, you need a household income of roughly 6 figures. The average American salary is $64,000. You see the math, it does not work. And here is where it gets even more insulting. 80% of existing mortgage holders are locked in at rates below 6%. 70% are below 5%. More than half are below 4%. That means the people who already own homes have no incentive to sell, because selling means giving up a rate they will never get again and buying into a market that is more expensive on every level. Economists call this the lock-in effect, and it has strangled housing supply. Inventory is still well below pre-pandemic levels in most of the country. New home sales fell 17.6% in January to an annual pace of just 587,000 units, and builders are struggling too. NHB reports nearly 300,000 unfilled job openings in construction, rising material costs, and a nationwide shortage of about 1.2 million housing units. Fortune ran a piece this year that laid it out plainly. They said it would take one of three things to restore broad affordability: mortgage rates dropping to the mid-2% range, a 50% jump in household income, or a one-third plunge in home prices. None of those are happening. Not one. So what you are left with is a system where the people who got in before 2022 are sitting on cheap mortgages and appreciating equity, and everyone else is either renting forever, moving to a cheaper city, or going into dangerous amounts of debt just to get the keys. That is not a housing market. That is a class barrier dressed up as real estate. And it is locking an entire generation out of the single most reliable wealth-building tool in American history. Artificial intelligence is quietly replacing you. Now I need to talk about something that is happening right underneath the surface of all the other problems we have been discussing. And it might be the most dangerous one of all, because nobody is panicking about it yet. Artificial intelligence is not coming for your job someday in the future. It is already here. And the numbers are not theoretical. In January 2026 alone, 7,624 layoffs were directly attributed to AI adoption, not restructuring, not downsizing. Companies explicitly said we are cutting these positions because AI can do them now. Block, the company behind Square and Cash App, just announced it is eliminating more than 4,000 employees, nearly half its entire workforce, as AI reshapes its operations. Meta is reportedly planning layoffs that could affect 16,000 workers, roughly 20% of the company, driven by the need to offset rising AI infrastructure costs. Amazon has explicitly tied workforce reductions to automation. Salesforce eliminated 4,000 customer support roles last year, citing efficiency gains from its AI products. And these are not small companies experimenting. These are some of the largest employers in the technology sector, making permanent structural changes to how work gets done. Goldman Sachs published research projecting that generative AI could affect 300 million full-time jobs globally, with 25% of all work hours automatable. The World Economic Forum estimates 85 million jobs could be displaced by the end of this year. And the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas found something chilling in their data. Employment among workers aged 22 to 25 in AI-exposed fields has declined 13%, not because young people are being laid off in waves, because companies have simply stopped hiring them. The entry-level job, the first rung of the ladder that every generation has used to build a career, is being automated before new graduates can even apply. And here is the part that should keep you up at night. 60% of U.S. hiring managers surveyed by Resume.org said they plan to conduct layoffs in 2026, and AI was the most cited reason. But when researchers dug deeper, nearly 60% of those same managers admitted they emphasize AI as the reason, because it is viewed more favorably than saying the company just needs to cut costs. They are using AI as a cover story, which means the real picture is even murkier than the data suggests. Some of these layoffs are genuine automation, some are corporate cost-cutting dressed up in a Silicon Valley buzzword. But either way, the jobs are gone, and the people who held them are entering a labor market that just lost 92,000 positions in a single month, with companies that are openly telling Wall Street their future workforce will be smaller, cheaper, and increasingly non-human. I want to show you two numbers, and I want you to sit with them for a second before I say anything else. The top 1% of American households own 31% of all wealth in this country. The bottom 50% own 2.5%. Read that again. Half the country, over 165 million people, share 2.5% of the pie, and the slice at the top has been growing every single year for decades. Now, normally when people bring up wealth inequality, it gets dismissed as class warfare or political posturing. But I am not making a political argument here. I am making a mathematical one. Because this gap is not just unfair, it is economically dangerous. And here is why. The top 10% of earners are now responsible for nearly 50% of all consumer spending in the United States. That is up from about a third in the 1990s. The entire economy has become dependent on wealthy people continuing to spend. And what drives wealthy people to spend? The stock market, their portfolios, their asset values. Wilmington Trust estimated that 20 to 25% of recent spending growth came directly from the wealth effect, meaning people spent more because their stocks went up and they felt rich. So what happens when the market corrects? And right now the S&P 500 is down about 6% from its all-time high. Morgan Stanley's chief U.S. equity strategist just published a note showing that 50% of all stocks in the Russell 3000 are already down 20% or more from their 52-week highs. Among S&P 500 members, that number exceeds 40%. Half the market is already in a bear market, and most people do not even know it because the indexes are propped up by a handful of mega-cap tech stocks, and when the top falls, everyone falls. Because of how concentrated stock ownership is in this country, the top 1% own 50% of all stocks and mutual funds. The bottom 50% own 1%. 1%. So when politicians and news anchors say the stock market is the economy, They are really saying the financial well-being of the wealthiest Americans is the economy, and everyone else is just along for the ride. Meanwhile, the 12 richest people in America have a combined net worth that now exceeds $2.7 trillion. That number has more than quadrupled since March 2020. In the same period, real wages for the bottom half of workers have barely kept pace with inflation. Household debt hit $18.59 trillion, savings rates collapsed, and 72% of Americans now say they have a negative view of the economy according to Pew Research. The wealth gap is not a slow leak, it is a structural fracture. And every crisis, every recession, every market shock widens it further. The rich buy the dip, the poor sell to survive, and the gap becomes permanent. The government is borrowing your future. All right, I need you to stay with me on this one because I know government debt is not the sexiest topic in the world. But what I am about to walk you through is the single most important thing happening in this country right now, and almost nobody understands it. On March 17, 2026, the national debt of the United States crossed $39 trillion. And if you think that is just a big scary number that does not affect your daily life, let me explain exactly how it does. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the federal government will spend over $1 trillion this year just paying interest on that debt, not paying it down, not reducing it, just covering the interest. That is $7,700 per American household going to Wall Street bondholders and foreign governments for the privilege of borrowing money we already spent. And that $1 trillion in interest is now the third largest line item in the entire federal budget, behind only Social Security and Medicare. It is bigger than national defense, bigger than veterans' benefits, bigger than every dollar spent on education, transportation, and science combined. And it is growing faster than anything else. The American Action Forum just published projections showing that interest payments will double to $2 trillion by 2036. They will exceed Medicare spending by 2028. They will exceed all defense and non-defense discretionary spending by 2038. And by 2048, interest payments will become the single largest expenditure of the federal government. Let that settle in for a second. Within 20 years, the United States government will spend more money servicing its past than investing in its future. More on interest than on roads, schools, bridges, hospitals, the military, NASA, the FBI, all of it. For every dollar the government collects in taxes right now, 19 cents goes straight to interest. By 2036, it will be 26 cents. More than a quarter of everything you pay in federal taxes will go to paying interest on money that was borrowed before most of you were even paying attention. And here is the part that should make you furious. The Penn-Wharton budget model, which is one of the most respected fiscal analysis tools in the country, has estimated that without major policy changes, the U.S. Treasury will become unable to roll over its accumulated obligations within roughly 20 years. That means at some point in the next 2 decades, the math simply stops working. Either the government defaults on its debt, which has never happened, or it prints enough money to inflate its way out, which destroys the purchasing power of every dollar in your bank account. Either way, you pay. The debt is not an abstraction. It is a claim on your future. Every dollar that goes to interest is a dollar that does not go to your roads, your kids' schools, your veterans' hospitals, or your Social Security check. And nobody in Washington is even pretending to fix it anymore. Social Security is on a countdown clock. If you are under 50, what I am about to tell you will change how you plan the rest of your financial life. If you are over 50, it might change how you sleep tonight. Social Security, the program that 67 million Americans depend on right now, the program that keeps roughly 22 million seniors out of poverty, is less than 7 years from insolvency. Not 30 years. Not some distant future your grandchildren will deal with. 7 years. The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to run dry around 2032. And when that happens, current law does not authorize the program to borrow money to cover the gap. It mandates an automatic across-the-board benefit cut. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget puts that cut at approximately 24%. 24%. For the average retired couple, that is roughly $18,000 per year, gone. Not reduced, gone. And I want to be very clear about something. This is not a maybe. This is not a projection that depends on a recession or a war or a stock market crash. This is the baseline scenario. The math is already baked in. There are more people retiring, they are living longer, and there are fewer workers paying into the system relative to the number of people drawing from it. When Social Security was created in 1935, there were roughly 42 workers for every retiree. By 1960, it was 5 to 1. Today, it is approximately 2.7 to 1. and it is headed toward 2-to-1 within the next decade. The system was designed for a demographic reality that no longer exists, and Washington knows this. They have known it for decades. Every year, the Social Security trustees publish a report that says in plain language, the trust fund is depleting and benefits will need to be cut or taxes will need to be raised. And every year, Congress does nothing. Because touching Social Security is considered political suicide, so they kick the can. And every year they kick it. The eventual fix gets more expensive, more painful, and more disruptive to the people who can least afford it. Meanwhile, the government is adding a new trillion to the national debt every 5 months. Interest payments alone will exceed $1 trillion this year, and proposals to fix Social Security keep getting shot down or turned into political footballs. Senator Cassidy proposed a plan that would borrow $1.5 trillion and invest it in the stock market to fund benefits. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget called it a dangerous debt-funded gamble that could add up to $170 trillion to the national debt over 75 years. That is not a solution. That is a Hail Mary from a government that has no plan. The promises that were made to you, the ones your parents counted on, the ones you are planning your retirement around, are not fully funded. They are backed by the assumption that this government can keep borrowing forever. And every honest economist will tell you that assumption has an expiration date, and it is a lot closer than most people think. America is dying on the inside. Everything we have talked about so far, the jobs, the debt, the housing, the savings, the inequality, all of it shows up in the numbers. You can put it on a chart, you can cite a report, but this next one does not live on a spreadsheet. It lives in the faces of people you know. It lives in your own mirror, some mornings. America is in the middle of a mental health crisis so severe that it is literally killing people. And I do not mean that as a figure of speech. Over 264,000 Americans die every year from what public health officials now call deaths of despair. That is drug overdoses, alcohol-related deaths, and suicides combined. 264,000 people a year. That is more than die in car accidents. More than die from diabetes. More than died on September 11th every single week for an entire year. And this number has been climbing for over 2 decades. The Pew Charitable Trusts published an analysis calling it what it is, a crisis that would be considered the public health emergency of the century if it had not been overshadowed by COVID. 1 in 5 American adults has a diagnosable mental illness. Serious mental illness among young adults has quadrupled in just over a decade, going from 3% to 12%. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 10 and 14. Let me say that again. Between the ages of 10 and 14, children. 1 person dies by suicide in this country approximately every 11 minutes, and a study from Oxford Academic published in Health Affairs found that people with less than $5,000 in financial assets have more than twice the odds of experiencing depression and anxiety compared to those with over $100,000. That is not a coincidence. That is cause and effect. Financial stress does not just make you uncomfortable, it makes you sick, it rewires your brain, it shortens your life. And everything else we have been talking about in this video, the job losses, the debt, the housing crisis, the evaporating savings, all of it feeds directly into this. Mortality linked to drug overdose and suicide among adults under 40 has increased more than 40% since 2010. U.S. Crider 20 bold, 1 favor 1 Ford and VAR, mortality rock up to May and fared and some. Life expectancy, which was supposed to keep climbing like it does in every other developed nation, has stalled and in some years actually declined. The richest country in the history of the world and its people are dying younger than they used to. Not because of a virus, not because of a war, because of despair. Because the economic system that was supposed to provide stability, opportunity, and upward mobility has instead delivered anxiety, debt, and a growing sense that no matter how hard you work, you are falling behind. And that feeling is not irrational. The data proves it is real. The system is failing millions of people, and the cost is not just financial, it is human, it is biological, and it is measured in funerals. The country is physically falling apart. Think about the bridge you drove over this morning. Think about the water that came out of your faucet. Think about the power lines running to your house. Now consider this. The American Society of Civil Engineers grades the nation's infrastructure every 4 years, and the most recent report card gave the United States a C. Not a C+, a C, and that is after the largest federal investment in infrastructure in decades, over $1 trillion authorized through the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Before that investment, the grade was a C-. Before that, a D+. We spent over $1 trillion and improved by a fraction of a letter grade. And the details inside that report are far worse than the overall number. The energy grid was downgraded from a C- to a D+, largely because electricity infrastructure simply cannot keep up with growing demand. Peak electricity demand could increase by 18% in winter and 15% in summer by 2034, and an estimated 300 million Americans could face power outages between now and 2028 due to grid failures. That is almost the entire country. 43% of American roads are in poor or mediocre condition. Over 46,000 bridges are rated structurally deficient. 42% of the nation's 617,000 bridges are more than 50 years old. The country loses 6 billion gallons of treated drinking water every single day through leaking pipes. That is enough to fill more than 9,000 swimming pools every day. Gone. Into the ground. And the ASI estimated the total infrastructure funding shortfall at $2.59 trillion. That is not a wish list. That is what it would take just to bring things up to a passable standard. And here is the part most people do not realize. American infrastructure was built in two major waves. The first during the 1920s, designed to last about a century. The second after World War II, designed to last about 50 years. Both of those life cycles have now expired. The highways built for Model Ts are crumbling under modern freight. Water pipes laid when jazz was still a new art form are bursting under the stress. Power plants that fueled the golden age of American manufacturing are sputtering toward obsolescence. And unlike previous generations, there is no third wave of grand construction on the horizon. The federal government is running a $1.9 trillion annual deficit. Interest payments are eating $1 trillion a year. And President Trump signed an executive order to halt the dispersal of remaining infrastructure funds. The country that built the interstate highway system, that built the Hoover Dam, that put a man on the moon, is now watching its own foundations rot because it cannot agree to fix a pothole. The country is not just declining in abstract economic terms. It is physically, structurally deteriorating underneath your feet, and every day that passes without a serious plan makes the eventual cost higher, the eventual failure more catastrophic, and the eventual reckoning closer. Here is what nobody is telling you, and I mean nobody. Not the White House, not Wall Street, not the cable news anchors, not the economists who get paid to explain away every warning sign until it is too late. What is happening in America right now is not 10 separate problems. It is one problem. And once you see it as one problem, everything changes. The job market is not weak because of one bad month. It is weak because companies are replacing workers with AI, because small businesses cannot get credit, because consumer spending is falling, because people are buried in debt, because housing is unaffordable, because wages have not kept up with the cost of being alive in this country for 20 years. Every one of those problems feeds the next. Debt kills spending. Spending kills jobs. Job losses kill savings. Empty savings accounts kill mental health. Mental health crises kill productivity. And the whole thing spirals downward while the government borrows another trillion every 5 months to paper over the cracks. The national debt is $39 trillion. Interest alone is eating $1 trillion a year. Social Security is 7 years from insolvency with a 24% benefit cut baked into the law. The infrastructure is physically crumbling. The energy grid is one heat wave away from failure in half the country. 50% of the stock market is already in bear territory, and most people do not know it because the indexes are propped up by a handful of companies. The top 1% owns 31% of all wealth. The bottom half owns 2.5%. And 264,000 Americans a year are dying from despair, overdoses, and suicide, and that number keeps climbing. This is not a cycle. This is a convergence. Every one of these crises was building independently for years, some for decades. And they are all arriving at the same time. The war in the Middle East did not cause this. The pandemic did not cause this. No single president caused this. What is happening is the result of 40 years of deferred maintenance on every system that holds this country together: economic, physical, social, and institutional. And the 2026 Edelman Trust Barometer confirmed what you already feel. Only 22% of Americans trust the federal government. Affective polarization, the term for how much Americans despise the other side, has surged 30 points since 2000. Only 21% of Americans believe the next generation will be better off. People have separated their personal survival from their collective faith in the system. They are managing their own lives because they have stopped expecting the country to manage anything at all. And that is the most dangerous data point of all. Because a society can survive a recession, it can survive a war, it can survive a debt crisis, but it cannot survive the moment its own people stop believing it will hold together. That is the line. And we are standing on it. I am not telling you all of this to scare you. I am telling you this because you deserve to know. Because the people who are supposed to be managing this country are not telling you the truth about what is happening. And the only defense you have, the only real defense any of us have, is information. If you understand what is coming, you can prepare. You can pay down your highest interest debt now before rates climb again. You can build an emergency fund, even if it is $50 a week, because that is $2,600 a year, and that puts you ahead of 59% of the country. You can diversify your income so you are not one layoff away from disaster. You can talk to your parents about Social Security and make sure their retirement plan does not depend entirely on a program that is 7 years from a 24% cut. You can stop assuming the system will take care of you, because the system is not taking care of itself. None of this happened overnight, and none of it is going to be fixed overnight. But the worst thing you can do right now is pretend it is not happening. The second worst thing you can do is panic. The right thing to do is get informed, get prepared, and get ahead of it while you still can. If this video opened your eyes to something you did not see before, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for me, not for the algorithm, because the only reason countries end up in real trouble is that people stay quiet until it is too late. And by then, the damage is woven into the fabric of everything. If you want to stay ahead of what is actually happening in this economy, not the headlines, not the talking points, but the real forces shaping the next decade, make sure you are subscribed, notifications on, because this is only the beginning. The data is evolving every week. The warning signs are accelerating. And I am going to keep breaking this down piece by piece so you are not blindsided like everyone else. Take care of yourselves, take care of your families, and I will see you in the next one.